Hello again, and welcome to the No Sugar Podcast. I'm Rob Loggia with your host, Janice McAfee, and we have a very special guest, and one that has worked in the industry that John McAfee founded, which is cybersecurity, and is going to talk to us today about what he is doing, because he is certainly out doing in the world. Jasun, nice to meet you.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure to meet you as well. Pleasure to meet both of you, actually. I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me up on your stage and your podcast. This is a wonderful opportunity. And so did you want me to dive in, or?
Black Alchemy, the executive summary.
Yeah, Black Alchemy. Yeah, so the executive summary, elevator pitch. So 6 years ago, I started a company called Bits and Digits, based on my necessity or my internal need or yearning to express some of the stories of the experience that I went through when I worked for a few agencies that I worked for. I wanted to give people a more down-to-earth understanding of the cyber underpinnings that goes on in all across the globe. Long story short, after about 2 years of that company, and that's where I met John. That's where I first established contact with John. But after about 2 years, people started to read my articles and they started asking questions like, can you help me? And can you fix me in this situation? And I said, at the time, cross-contaminating those types of operations was a bad idea from my business partner and my legal representative's perspective. So I started an arm called Black Alchemy. And the reason why we called it Black Alchemy is because black is the substance of creation. It has the core of all elements, and alchemy is the art of transmuting one thing into another. And in my understanding of how cybersecurity, privacy works, most people are simply just ignorant to privacy technologies and methodologies. So when I take in somebody's fear and I transmute it into a solution, I consider that alchemy, and that's the name. So what are we? We are a full suite, full service, 360-degree privacy and cybersecurity boutique. We do everything from you got hacked and you don't know what's happening to you got kidnapped and you need to lay low. We do it all.
Wow, that's quite a range.
Yeah, it's quite a big range.
Well, that's amazing. So I wanted to ask you about, I was going up to your Twitter page and I saw your feed about Faraday cages, and obviously I have a little bit of experience in that situation when I was on the run with John, and it was very effective in making sure that no one could track us electronically, but also for the average person it would be extremely expensive, and and maybe the average person wouldn't necessarily know how to implement that in their lives. And so I just would like if you would kind of speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. I'm so happy that you are familiar with Faraday cages, so we can all talk about it on a very digestible level. So what a Faraday cage is, for all intents and purposes, is a electromagnetic radio frequency blocking algorithm. And I'm going to use the word algorithm because it's a technical and scientific hypothesis on how wave propagation works. Without the big words, technology, like certain cages, certain fabrics, they have the way they're interwoven and the way that the signals are able to go through or to block them from emitting outside. A Faraday cage contains all electronic signals are inside of whatever it's protecting. In your case, most of the cases that we have, like with witness protection clients or people who are really just trying to lay low, and actually I'll show you something. This entire coach bag has Faraday material on the inside. Like, we outfitted it all the way through and through. So the value of a Faraday cage is, or to buy Faraday material, so I'm going to even drop some alpha in here. The price point for Faraday cages back about 5 years ago was extremely high. And there's an excessive amount of people, brokers, vendors, retailers that say Faraday cage or RF blockers, and they're not. And one of the real ways that you can test or evaluate, number one, is, does it have a Faraday certification? Does it say that it's Faraday compliant, or does it say it blocks RF, signals? When you're dealing in a loss of life capacity, using a Faraday cage is the number one method to use. Now, where do you go and get these cages, and where can you go buy Faraday compliant material just to outfit your home, outfit your purse? I'm going to drop this information for you because, listen, this is actually a service we provide, but check it out. Argamesh. Argemesh. You can go on Google, type in Argamesh, and there's only about 5 or 6 vendors that sell it. It's about $25 a yard. And if you have any kind of sewing skills and you have any kind of like fabric manipulation skills, the premise or the basic construct that you want to ensure is that all exits and the folds that you make in this bag must be overlaid. The material is inlaid with copper and nickel, I believe is what it is. And as long as the contacts are touching on all sides and there's no way for even air, imagine that it's air. If air can get in it or water can get in it, so can an RF signal. And that's what it does. It blocks RF communications. And I don't want to belabor the point, but what's really important about that is most people don't understand that their phones are always on.
Yeah.
Since 2006, most all phones in the world don't have batteries that you can remove. So if a phone doesn't have a battery, it's always on. And if it's always on, anything from a cell site stimulator like a Stingray, like an intercepting device, or any kind of law enforcement or hacker and a cyber criminal can identify you and find you and exploit your phone even if you think it's off.
Right. But this is like Groundhog Day for Janice and I. We were just discussing this earlier. And in essence, it's as if you go back to like novels or sci-fi movies from the 40s, and they were talking about spy devices. This would be the ideal spy device, and we could plant that on somebody. They've now convinced everybody to carry one willingly. We all do so. That's the phone. It is essentially a spy device that you take with you of your own free accord, and anybody that has the right keys can then look at what you're doing. Yeah.
That is 100%. One of the things I remember the former CIA director said, and I'm going to leave his name out of this, but one thing he said is every app that you have, and he said it he was saying a message inside of a message for certain people in the community, but you're going to be able to pick up what I'm putting down. Every app on those phones that we have, these smart or intellectual phones that we have, every app, think about it like this, is a spying device. Number one, it's created by a company that may be owned or may have influence with a foreign intelligence service that collects data with or without your permission. You got people walking around here with 20,000 apps that don't do anything, and they wonder why, people are stealing their identities or hijacking their wallets, or the crazy looking weird person that's following them is happening because they don't understand that that's what they're walking around with, a walking and talking interception device.
Right.
I'll even share something with you, if you don't mind.
No, we don't mind.
We don't mind at all.
I will never say anything that can get anybody in trouble, I assure you of that. But here's a situation that was so funny. I had a case about 3 years ago. A woman in let's just say in the East Coast. She had a situation with a very wealthy husband of hers, ex-husband. She was looking to divorce him. So this ex-husband hired a whole bunch of quack cyber people, and they were supposed to be providing some kind of reconnaissance on her. And she felt it. She said, there's something wrong. Can you just come in and do what you do? I heard you're a magic guy, and can you just come out and check us out? Found 2 Nokias, old Nokias, in the back of her trunk. Like, they didn't go out and buy AirTags, but there weren't AirTags back then. They didn't go out and buy the old GPS trackers. They just got Nokia phones, put in their own little, their signatures and their own accounts, and were monitoring with that. It's that, if you think about it, that's a $25 investment versus spending $300 on a GPS tracker. It's about how you're able to think about security. It's really the game. It's not about the technology that applies it.
Right. Janice sent me a link to your Twitter feed, and one of the things that I saw, if I'm in big trouble, I may reach out and pay whatever the price is, but you're looking to get this message to everybody. So it's not just pay me a lot of money and I'll tell you, but you're freely tweeting about some of the best practices you found. I saw the one tweet on this material you just talked about. So that's one of the things that you're doing too. You don't have to do that. And, I think it's important that people understand that doers in this world come in all forms. And, here's somebody with their own successful enterprise built on years of experience. You could have just parked your ass in that and said, I'm good. Forget about the rest of you. You can afford my fee. You come pay me. You're not. And I would commend that, but I would also put it forward as a model, a better model. We can do our things to make our money, but then we can also do other things that don't have to have that attached to it.
100%. I tell you what, I don't, to be very transparent, I am a former kid that joined a gang when he was in his youth at 13, called himself a gangbanger. Father owned a cell phone store. That's how I got my hacking underpinning, if you will. And then out of just pure boredom, I joined a gang, and I did a lot of stupid street stuff. Spent 2 years in juvie. Took a lot of waivers to get into the military, a lot of waivers to get into the intelligence service, well, into the military, but, of course that transferred over. But I said all that to say this. My background is very unique in the sense that I understand that not all people have access to the things and the blessings that I've been afforded. Like, I understand that there are a lot of blessings in my life. Many times over, I should be dead. Many times over. And at a certain point in my life, I realized that there's a reason why I'm here. Like, it beyond the whole, I left Christianity, I left religion a long time ago and became an alchemist about 5 years ago. And in that understanding, I realized, okay, well, look, you can be like everybody else. You can go and, you're a former CISO of a Fortune 100 company, you used to be a cyber spy. You can call the biggest ticket you want. And then the people who need you will never be able to touch your services, ever. So I have no business acumen. That's why I had a business partner. And I say this, I'm getting to my point, around my ankle to get to my elbow. When I started my company, it was all free, 100%. People would call me and I'd say, you know what, don't even worry about the money. I just Bitcoin's doing well. And it became a charity. And then that's when I realized that I can't do things for free continuously and run a business. So I said that to say this. The Robin Hood model works well for me. Meaning, when the wealthy call me, and that's 90% of my clients. 90% of my clients are celebrities that you see on the big screen, politicians that you know intimately, that you may hate and that you may like, and OnlyFans models, in cyber and Instagram influencers. Everybody wants, those are the targets right now. Interesting. They can afford me, but when a woman or a man calls and their spouse is beating them, and their spouse has a certain set of skills like the taken, and they feel like they're being preyed upon, I can't hang up the phone, and I don't understand who could. I can't hang up the phone. I have to help them. I have to show them something to do, and I put the content out there because. Number one, I want to create a series. I mean, that's me getting ready to create some kind of production because I feel like what information I'm sharing is valuable to not just our community, but everybody out there, because security is a mindset. But it's also, the videos are a legacy of mine. Is to say, it's not professional. I don't want it to be professional. I don't want it to look all the way like clean and cut. I want it to look raggedy. I want it to look like, hey, that is a real field training exercise. This guy is in the streets. He's talking about something he just saw that I can relate to, and it's digestible. Just because you're moving your mouth doesn't mean you're saying something. So I like to make sure that I'm precise and focused with the words and the production that I put out.
That's amazing. I would also like to commend you because just based off of my background, if I could have gotten in touch with someone like yourself, I probably wouldn't have ended up meeting my husband, but I definitely wouldn't have been getting beat up for years, and I think that's very important, that it's something that people don't realize. We don't necessarily want cops coming in and all that stuff. We just want to quietly get away, and if there's a way that we can learn how to do that for ourselves, of course. And I'm just not just talking about women in my background, but just women in general. And not even just that, but just learning how to be security minded, like you said, because in this world of instant gratification and getting that sort of dopamine from posting and sharing everything on social media, we've completely forgot that there's predators out in the world, and you're sharing your locations and what restaurant you're eating at or where you're shopping at, and you're not realizing that people are watching this and they're watching you, and they now have your routine. And then they can, and this is not just for women, this is men as well. I think we've completely abandoned all sensibilities when it comes to protecting ourselves, and I think it's very valuable what you're doing, and I really appreciate that you're willing to put your expertise out there and not charge, like it's not about money, it's just about making sure people have the knowledge.
And not all the time, sure.
Themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and that says a lot coming from both of you, but specifically you. I really appreciate that, because unlike a lot of women, and I know you intimately. What I mean by that is I did my research on you 4 years ago. Because there was a time when John sent a tweet and he was like, if you have a security team, if you have this, send me your resume, send me your stuff in the DMs. And I reached out to his I wanted to show him my hacking skills. So I was like, look, I'm gonna reach out to your assistant. And I had the assistant, I got his name, and I reached out to the assistant and said, hey, I'm your guy. I can have a team there in 10 minutes. And but I say all that to say this: you live that life, and unlike a lot of people, you feel, the smell of the impending pressure of being discovered, the impending feeling of somebody after you, and that is a whole different level of experience in this reality. And to your point, the world that we live in today has been systematically robbed of its capacity to effectively think through their own security mechanisms. Whether that's because people have given all of their mental faculty into the technologies that say they can provide these services for them, which is a part of another deception. But at the end of the day, you are spot on. The average person that I communicate with, they have no understanding. If I say the word situational awareness, it's like, yeah, situational. Okay, that means I'm here. Awareness. Yeah, I'm aware. I just drank some coffee, Jay. I'm like, okay, no. Or I go to a shooting school and I'm teaching, or if I'm teaching combatives, or wherever I'm going, I'm doing these things, and I'm out with I call them snake eaters. We're shooting field, and I'm out with these guys, Navy SEALs or Navy SEALs, and whatever SF guys, and the brawn is the only thing they think about. Look, I'll just take down the door. And it's not the extremes that we live in. Whether it's social media influencing us, like you said, the dopamine hit to get a like because it's synthetic and you want somebody to like you because you're empty inside. And then also you've got the other side of that spectrum where you are just in the range every day, shooting every day, and that's all you think about. Now merging in the two of them with the soft skills and the hard skills that create a proper security infrastructure for your mind, because security is in the mind first. And that's one of the first things I tell people when I meet them, like when it comes to this kind of engagement.
Well, that's really the only place it can live. John McAfee was brilliant with this stuff, and he regarded the phone. People would ask him, "How do I secure my phone?" And he says, "You don't. It's gotten past the point where you do. You now need to view that as a hostile device," and that's the way he treated them. And that was the reason why he set out to design his own phone, which had air-gapped switches inside. So if you said, I want to turn the phone off, I want to turn the Wi-Fi radio off, I want to turn the Bluetooth off, you knew it was actually off, speaking to your point earlier, that these things are not off, up to and including the entire phone. When you've hit the power button, you've asked it to turn itself off, and it simply hasn't done so. It remains with this small amount of reserve power, enough to activate any of the functions that people might need if they wanted to know where you were. Now, let's also be honest, there's another aspect to it. Security, frankly, who does it impact if there's a breach? If you're high profile, if you have, things that you're doing, maybe there's a large risk surface there. But if you're targeted by scammers, well, now they've created a risk surface. But for most people, the way they're thinking about it is, I don't care if anybody gets my cupcake recipe. And I think what they're missing is they don't understand how quickly things can turn around to them being that person who needs to worry about somebody looking for them. And it's almost as if at that point it's too late. And now you need to begin to learn these things, and you already should have learned them when it was maybe just a cupcake recipe at stake.
You're hitting so many nails directly dead center on the spot. I wonder who you used to work for. But no, you're right. I mean that with all love and respect. So it's almost like you're in the back of my head, because these are the words that I've said, or we share the same sentiment. How about that? All three of us, and I love that. I like being around the same type of energy. It's very rare. So you said something that hit a point, and it's something I often say when I'm onboarding clients. People say this as a script all the time. I'm not. Who am I? I'm just a regular reporter. I'm just this person. Nobody wants to know anything about me, and I go into my old exploitation days when I used to socially engineer people for, it was a life or death situation. And I say, When I would hunt people for a living, I wouldn't go through the front door. I would never go through a bank vault. I would go after the weakest link. If you are connected by 2 degrees of separation to somebody that is my target, then you are the person that's going to get exploited. You're the person that's doing all of these things that are causing the vulnerabilities in the pattern of life of the target that I may be exploiting. So when you think about it, and if you're a selfish person, which a lot of people are, and that's fine, and you still say, well, I don't care, I'm not doing anything wrong, that is the second thing we hear all the time. I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't care. And that's the problem. Unfortunately, and always, and correct me if I'm speaking too much, but the problem is data brokers, which most people don't know, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, Axiom, all of these data brokers, Facebook, Meta who buys from these data service providers, they get hacked, right? So when you think about the last person that got kidnapped in your circle of trust, or the last person that went through an identity theft in your circle of trust, it's not hard to create the map between a data broker's breach. T-Mobile gets breached, Equifax gets breached, and everybody's so desensitized. They see it on the news and they're desensitized. They say to themselves, I'm not affected. But when your identity gets stolen, or that young girl from Chile gets kidnapped and trafficked into Texas, and her ID says your name, then you have to say to yourself, like, what is my liability? How am I applying my energy to fix and remediate this? And a lot of people don't get that matrix. They don't see that loss of life connectivity. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow. And how do you fix that? How do you get people to care? It's so strange to me that, I guess until it happens to them, until that trouble comes knocking on their door, they don't give a shit. And how did we get this way as a society? How do you combat that, you yourself personally? How do you kind of wake people up to this reality?
That's a good question. Thank you for asking that, because it's a double-edged sword.
Janice keeps all the good questions for herself. I'm comic relief. So.
She's creme de la creme. She knows what she's got. She's top flight. So that's an interesting question. Before you met your husband, you probably had a little bit of understanding of cyber privacy and privacy in general, because there's certain ways that you lived your life in your past where you had to be not completely on the grid and not completely off. Am I right or wrong?
Right.
Okay. So you were fortunate in that regard. You were fortunate because you understood that somebody may be watching, and if I make a slip, this could happen. So you took proactive measures. You lived a proactive lifestyle, and then that proactive energy created proactive currency in your pattern of life. So your mental state always saw life through proactivity is valuable. That is a gift and a virtue that 99% of the world does not get. People don't want to get a security audit until they've been hit. People don't want to call a cyber broker to help them with privacy until after they've been breached. So your question to me was, how do I deal with that? So I used to be a very emotional person. I used to be a very passionate. When I talked about security, when I left the government, I was the guy that was always on the soapbox at every FBI meeting, every InfraGard meeting. And, hey, listen, the Chinese are coming. And then, I spent 6 years doing Byzantine intelligence, and anybody listening should just Google that. Just type in Byzantine in Google. It's not classified anymore. Byzantine cyber. Just type that in. So. And just to give people a little bit of a peek, it's the active cyber campaign that China has in America, exploiting a lot of our networks. But anyway, so I was one of those hunters, right? Anyway, a lot of people don't get that. So when you try to sell security, which I learned 5 years ago, it never works. Because morally for me, if I am telling you that the sky is falling, and it legitimately is, I still have some kind of energetic problem with just giving you fear. And then if you choose not to engage me, I'm walking away from you with vulnerabilities that I know specifically about you. So what kind of human being am I? And it's kind of a thin line, because, I'll see security engineers, and on the back of a breach or back of a major news headline, they'll come in and say, hey, this is the problem and this is how we fix it. And I can't say that I'm completely innocent of doing that as well. But using that kind of methodologies didn't work for me. So now I resigned all of my advertising attempts, and I've submitted my videos as a replacement, because any given time, if you ever caught me speaking on a stage, on a speech, and I've done a lot, I was that guy, the voice and the passion and directness, and it has to happen, because if it doesn't, I was that. And it took a lot of meditation, it took me understanding life differently for me to communicate my craft differently. I had to understand that everybody's on their own journey. And at the time, I was walking around with a fire hose, thinking that everybody was on fire. Let me help you, let me save you, check this out, it's about to go down. And I realized that may have not been the most advantageous communication method. And then I realized, if they need you and you just build it, they will come. Sounds cliche, but that's how it works. So I don't chase, I attract. I create a nest, an environment to where both of you look at my Twitter page, you can see immediately what this guy is about. Black Alchemy is about privacy. He's about this, and they're about this, and they can do this. You don't have to look anymore. You don't have to inquire. Like, I wonder if they have Faraday bags. Did you read any of his posts? That guy probably has. He makes them. You know what I mean? Like, and that's how I met that challenge, Janice.
That's awesome. Amazing.
It seems like if we don't, I mean, people, there's always, we can talk for many reasons, and people can talk because they want something, people can talk because they like to hear themselves talk. I know way too many people like that. But if we're talking to be understood, what I get from you, what you're saying, and I happen to agree with if it is what you're saying, is that we need to look at the problem differently. Communicating to be understood is a completely different problem set from every other type of communicating that there is. And sometimes we need to overstate things. Sometimes we need to, be clear in a way that might seem like we're kicking a dead horse. But if that's what it takes, because if your intent is to reach somebody else, that goal has to stay in sight. As soon as it becomes about anything else, now is where you can create an alienation. And another point that I did want to make was that it seems almost like, and again, this just comes sitting here from listening to you. I haven't done studies or anything like that, but it almost seems like talking about what could happen to somebody isn't the right approach. And that maybe, with things like security and things like privacy, what we really need to be doing is getting people to understand it almost in the same way that they do basic hygiene, which, most people aren't keeping clean because, I might die. They're keeping clean because you keep clean. It's basic hygiene. I mean, get with the program. Some people don't get it, but most people do. And think about what a better situation that is than security, where most people don't get it at all, and some people do. It's almost a complete reversal. So if people were thinking about this like hygiene and just doing a few sort of, best practices, we'd be in a lot better condition. And those ancillary effects, me doing something that now affects the person next to me, I think a lot of that would be diminished.
1,000%. And it's an ounce of prevention to stop the worst disease. And I know I butchered that whole phrase, that whole line, but an ounce of prevention. That's all it takes. Mm-hmm. And to your point, I think when I listen to security engineers or security architects or peers or people who identify themselves as being my peer, let me put it that way, and I don't mean that with any ego, because I know I'm confident in what I do. Good. So when I hear some people speak about these things, they use the floetic and the flowery language because they want to sound like they know what they're talking about, as if their context is rooted in the ground of cybersecurity, because they want to influence you that they know what they're talking about, and that doesn't work. I see glass stares most times when you're sitting in a space and somebody's talking about security and privacy, and if you can't speak to your audience, especially if you're speaking to somebody that can save their life, if you're sending a message that if they digest it, their life will be saved, then your precision, your decision of language is going to be so focused that your only objective is to ensure that they're able to digest your words and not have to go through any kind of faltering through to get to the message that you're conveying. And that's really one thing that I learned on my journey from a mentor, being very focused with your words, knowing who you're talking to, because it doesn't make sense to waste your voice if they're not going to be picking it up, in my opinion.
Yep. Basically know your audience. Yeah.
So that point, I have a question for you, Janice.
Yes.
I didn't mean to say Janice, but that's just the way I.
Okay. No problem.
So to this day, do you have any daily OPSEC practices that you still live by? I'm not asking what they are because that's definitely sensitive, but do you still live in that detail?
Very much so. Very much so. I try to continue to implement the things that John taught me, but because I'm not very technically savvy, most of what I rely on is what I learned prior to my meeting John, and then what things I learned from him, just dealing with the caliber of people that were after him, because that's a whole other type of world, that I was immersed in our relationship. So mostly my opposite, I guess it would be just being situationally aware at all times, and never letting my guard down. That's just how I live now, and that's something I will never not do. I hope that answers your question.
It does. It was a bit for me, and it was a bit for the flow of the conversation, because I definitely wanted to focus in on just this merriment of this conversation, all three of us having a conversation about the pattern of life that we live. Like, you're living it. Like, you're still living it. And my next question, if you don't mind, because I know this is an interview the other way around, but I wanted to ask one more question.
Just for the people talking, so please. This is rules here.
Okay, but wait, time out. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Mainframe compromised. Mainframe compromised. Unauthorized system access.
I have taken control of the system. You're all going to die down here.